It was the 6th hour, noon, the moment when the sun should have been burning at its highest point above Jerusalem. Pilgrims filled every street, thousands of voices rising and falling in the rhythm of Passover, but in a single breath, without warning, the world shifted. Light vanished. The sky turned black as if a vast unseen hand had draped a shroud across creation. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children clung to their parents. Rome's soldiers, hardened by years of brutality, stared upward in speechless confusion. This was no storm, no eclipse. During Passover, the moon is full, making such an event impossible. Yet here it was, swallowing the city whole. Matthew chapter 27 verse 45 tells us that from the 6th hour until the 9th, darkness covered the land. Not a dimming, not a shadow, but absolute darkness, as though creation itself recoiled from what was unfolding on the hill called Golgotha. For centuries, the prophets had warned of a day when God would darken the earth at noon. Amos chapter 8 verse 9 had spoken it long before anyone standing there was born. And now, with terrifying clarity, the prophecy had stepped into reality. The sun hid its face because the light of the world was carrying the weight of every sin ever committed. Imagine standing there, waiting for your eyes to adjust, realizing they never would. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every breath heavier. In that suffocating darkness, Jesus hung suspended between heaven and earth, bearing judgment that was not his own. The air felt charged, as if creation itself held its breath. This was not nature malfunctioning. This was the visible expression of divine justice, the Father turning his face away, and even the Son following his lead. What must the weight of our redemption have been for the heavens to dim in mourning? But the sky's silence was only the first sign. Something else was stirring beneath the surface, something powerful enough to shake the world they thought they knew. And as the darkness pressed in on Jerusalem, an unseen tension coiled beneath their feet, waiting for the moment it would break. If this message is reaching you, consider following our channel and declare in the comments, "Light overcomes." The darkness that had fallen at noon did not lift. It lingered like a heavy shroud stretched across the city, pressing down on every heart that stood beneath its weight. People whispered prayers under their breath, uncertain of what this sign from heaven meant. Then, just as Jerusalem was adjusting to the suffocating blackness, the ground itself responded. At first, it was nothing more than a subtle vibration, the kind that makes a person question whether they felt anything at all. A loose stone rolled across the dirt. A Roman soldier shifted his stance. A woman standing near the city gate steadied herself against a wall, her brow furrowed in confusion. But what began as a tremor quickly deepened into something no one could ignore. Matthew chapter 27 verse 51 tells us that when Jesus gave up his spirit, the earth quaked. Not a passing tremor, but a violent shaking that ripped through the ground like a living force. The hillside beneath Golgotha cracked open in jagged lines, breaking the earth with a sound like splitting rock. Pilgrims stumbled as the streets buckled beneath them. Animals brayed and bolted in fear. Dust clouds rose from collapsing walls as the foundations of the city trembled. This was not a natural earthquake. This was creation groaning, responding to the death of the one who had spoken it into being. The same voice that commanded mountains to rise and seas to form had just fallen silent, and the world felt the wound of that silence. For the faithful who knew the ancient stories, the moment carried a haunting echo. They remembered another mountain that trembled, Sinai, when God descended in fire and thunder to give his law to Moses. Exodus chapter 19 verse 18 describes the entire mountain shaking violently as God's presence rested upon it. But here, at Calvary, something even more staggering was unfolding. The earth was not trembling because God was descending. The earth was trembling because God was dying. The irony was almost unbearable. The ground that had always been steady beneath their feet now felt fragile, temporary, unable to contain the weight of what was taking place. It was as if creation itself was protesting, unable to remain still in the presence of such cosmic injustice and divine love intertwined. Yet the earthquake was not only a reaction, it was a revelation. The shaking of the earth mirrored the shaking of an entire spiritual order. The old covenant, with its rituals, sacrifices, and distance, was giving way to something entirely new. As the stones split and the earth heaved, it was as though the world was announcing that nothing would remain as it had been. The tremors opened fractures that stretched beyond physical ground, hinting at a deeper unraveling taking place in unseen realms. People clung to anything they could find, walls, pillars, one another, trying to steady themselves, unaware that the very ground beneath their souls was shifting as well. And just when it seemed the shaking could not grow more intense, something hidden within the city, something sacred, began to break open in a way no one could have imagined, drawing all eyes toward a place no one was allowed to enter. Inside the temple, life continued as if nothing unusual were happening. Priests moved through their duties with practiced precision, their footsteps soft against the polished stone floors. Incense drifted upward in fragrant coils, filling the inner courts with a solemn haze. Lamps flickered along the walls, casting gold reflections on the embroidered curtain that towered over the holy place. This curtain, the veil, was a sight known to every priest yet understood by so few. 60 feet high and 4 inches thick, woven of blue, purple, and scarlet, it loomed like an immovable reminder that sinful humanity could not draw near to the blazing presence of a holy God. For more than 15 centuries, no human hand had dared to touch what lay behind it. Only the high priest could pass through its barrier, and only once each year, and only with blood. To everyone else, this veil was both a warning and a wall. As the earth outside convulsed and the city reeled in fear, the temple's inner sanctuary stood in stillness. But stillness can shatter in an instant. Without warning, a violent sound exploded through the holy place. It was not the sound of fabric stretching or the slow tear of cloth worn by time. It was the deafening rip of something impossibly strong, being torn apart from a height no human could reach. The priests froze. Their rituals stopped mid-motion. Eyes widened in disbelief as the veil split from top to bottom. Threads snapped with a force that echoed like thunder, a supernatural tearing that defied reason. The heavy curtain, which teams of animals could not pull apart, fell open in 2 halves. And behind it, for the first time since the days of Moses, the most holy place lay exposed. What had been hidden for generations was now visible to trembling human eyes. The meaning of this moment was unmistakable, even if the priests themselves could not yet grasp it. The veil had never been merely fabric. It was the physical representation of humanity's separation from God. It symbolized the distance caused by sin, the gulf between the Creator and those who had rebelled against Him. Hebrews capítulo 10 verses 19-20 tells us that a new and living way has been opened for us through the curtain, which is His body. When Jesus yielded His Spirit, the barrier that no human could overcome was shattered by the hand of God Himself. The torn veil announced that the old system of sacrifices and intermediaries was finished. The way into God's presence was no longer restricted to one man on one day of the year. The blood of Jesus had opened a path for all who believe, not through rituals or lineage, but through His sacrifice alone. In a single moment, access that had been impossible for centuries was freely offered to every heart willing to come near. Imagine standing in that temple, watching the place once forbidden, to all but one now lying open, unguarded, unveiled. What had been a symbol of distance had become a doorway. There was no turning back, no reweaving the fabric, no stitching together what God had torn apart. The division between God and humanity had been permanently removed by the death of his son. The priests who witnessed it must have felt the weight of history shift beneath their feet, though they could not yet comprehend how drastically everything had changed. And while they stood in stunned silence, staring into the space once filled with the presence of God, another place in the city was about to reveal a sign even more unsettling, one that no priest, no ruler, and no citizen of Jerusalem was prepared to face. No one in Jerusalem could have imagined what would happen next. The darkness had descended, the earth had shaken, and the temple veil had torn like fragile cloth. But while people attempted to steady themselves, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them, something even more disturbing was happening beneath the city. Beyond the walls, scattered across the hillsides, lay the tombs of generations, carved stone chambers holding the remains of fathers, mothers, prophets, priests, and faithful men and women who had died waiting for God's promise. These tombs were sealed, silent, undisturbed for decades, some for centuries. Yet the earthquake that split rocks and foundations had reached them too, and cracks began to form across their stone entrances. What seemed at first like structural damage was only the beginning of something far more extraordinary. Matthew chapter 27 verses 52 and 53 declares that many holy people who had died were raised to life. Their tombs broke open when Jesus breathed his last. Imagine the stillness of those burial grounds, the dust settling after the tremors, the stones shifting into awkward angles. But then, in ways no human mind can fully grasp, breath returned to bodies long lifeless. Limbs that had stiffened in death became warm again. Eyes that had closed in the finality of grief opened once more. Yet the text tells us something remarkable. Although the tombs opened at the exact moment of Jesus' death, these risen saints did not appear in Jerusalem until after his resurrection. Even in this miracle, Jesus remained the first to conquer death forever. He was the pioneer, the one who walks ahead, the one whose victory makes every other victory possible. These holy ones rose because his sacrifice shattered the authority of death, not only for the future, but even reaching backward into the past. Picture the shock of encountering someone you thought you would never see again until the end of days. Perhaps a father who died last year, still recognizable but radiant with a life no sickness could diminish. Perhaps a teacher of the law whose wisdom had shaped an entire generation, now speaking with clarity untouched by age. Perhaps a prophet whose faith had been whispered through centuries of stories, now walking the streets of the holy city as a living testimony. The risen saints were not ghosts or illusions. They appeared to many. Their presence announced without a single spoken sermon that death had been invaded, disrupted, and dethroned. What Ezekiel had once seen in a vision, the valley of dry bones rising at the breath of God, was no longer poetry or prophecy. It was reality. It was happening in the very lanes and markets of Jerusalem. The ground that had swallowed countless lives through the centuries was now releasing them because a greater power had touched the grave. But these resurrected ones were not the ultimate destination of this miracle. They were signs. They were previews. They were living evidence that Jesus' death carried implications no one on earth had yet grasped. This moment revealed that the grave does not have the final word, and that God's promises reach further than human understanding can stretch. Imagine crowds gathering, stunned by the sight of these holy people walking again, whispering questions, struggling to make sense of what their eyes could not deny. If death itself was trembling, then nothing in their world was secure in its old meaning anymore. And as these resurrected saints moved among the people, quietly turning the city upside down with their presence alone, an even more profound revelation was preparing to unfold. One that would shift the story of humanity forever, one that no tomb, no stone, and no earthly authority could contain. Among all who witnessed the darkness at noon and the earthquake that tore the earth apart, one man stood closer to the cross than anyone else. He was not a disciple. He was not a priest. He was not a grieving relative whispering prayers through tears. He was a Roman centurion, a commander hardened by countless executions, a man trained to silence emotion and obey orders without hesitation. For him, crucifixion was routine. He had watched men curse, scream, bargain, spit, and collapse in agony more times than he could count. Yet from the moment Jesus was placed on the cross, something unsettled him. The silence of Jesus, the dignity in his suffering, and his words of forgiveness spoken to those hammering the nails began cracking open a place in the centurion's heart he had long sealed shut. He was witnessing a death unlike any he had ever supervised. As the hours passed, the centurion watched the crowd shift from mocking to murmuring as the darkness deepened. He saw how the women who followed Jesus wept quietly at the foot of the cross. He studied the inscription above Jesus' head, declaring him the King of the Jews. And he observed how Jesus, despite unimaginable pain, never lashed out in bitterness or hatred. When the earth quaked at the very moment Jesus released his final breath, the centurion's hardened exterior finally fractured. Matthew chapter 27 verses 52 and 53 records that he and the soldiers with him were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." This was no casual confession. It was the cry of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. Rome had drilled into him that Caesar was the only son of a divine ruler, yet here he was, standing before a crucified man, trembling because he recognized a greater truth. Imagine the weight that must have pressed on him as he replayed the events in his mind. The supernatural darkness, the earthquake, the torn earth, the unwavering grace of the man he had been ordered to kill. Everything he had believed about power, authority, life and death began collapsing under the force of this revelation. He had been chosen by Rome to ensure Jesus died. Instead, he became a witness to the greatest act of love the world had ever seen. The same hands that held the hammer now shook at the realization of whom they had pierced, yet grace moves in ways that defy logic. The cross does not avoid the guilty. It confronts them, embraces them, and transforms them. The centurion's transformation revealed a truth deeper than the earthquake. No heart is beyond the reach of God, not even the heart of the executioner. His confession did more than express belief. It declared surrender. In that moment, the centurion became a sign as powerful as the darkness and the quake. He became proof that the message of the cross is not reserved for the religious, the learned, or the morally polished. It reaches the broken, the violent, the scarred, the ones who believe they have gone too far for mercy to find them. The man who supervised death found life at the foot of the cross, and while the centurion stood in awe, processing the impossible truth unfolding before his eyes, another group of unlikely figures elsewhere in the city was about to step forward, driven by courage that had slept in silence until the moment it was finally needed. Among all who witnessed the darkness at noon and the earthquake that tore the earth apart, one man stood closer to the cross than anyone else. He was not a disciple. He was not a priest. He was not a grieving relative whispering prayers through tears. He was a Roman centurion, a commander hardened by countless executions, a man trained to silence emotion and obey orders without hesitation. For him, crucifixion was routine. He had watched men curse, scream, bargain, spit, and collapse in agony more times than he could count. Yet from the moment Jesus was placed on the cross, something unsettled him. The silence of Jesus, the dignity in his suffering, and his words of forgiveness spoken to those hammering the nails began cracking open a place in the centurion's heart he had long sealed shut. He was witnessing a death unlike any he had ever supervised. As the hours passed, the centurion watched the crowd shift from mocking to murmuring as the darkness deepened. He saw how the women who followed Jesus wept quietly at the foot of the cross. He studied the inscription above Jesus' head, declaring him the King of the Jews. And he observed how Jesus, despite unimaginable pain, never lashed out in bitterness or hatred. When the earth quaked at the very moment Jesus released his final breath, the centurion's hardened exterior finally fractured. Matthew chapter 27 verse 54 records that he and the soldiers with him were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." This was no casual confession. It was the cry of a man whose entire worldview had been shattered. Rome had drilled into him that Caesar was the only son of a divine ruler, yet here he was, standing before a crucified man, trembling because he recognized a greater truth. Imagine the weight that must have pressed on him as he replayed the events in his mind. The supernatural darkness, the earthquake, the torn earth, the unwavering grace of the man he had been ordered to kill. Everything he had believed about power, authority, life, and death began collapsing under the force of this revelation. He had been chosen by Rome to ensure Jesus died. Instead, he became a witness to the greatest act of love the world had ever seen. The same hands that held the hammer now shook at the realization of whom they had pierced, yet grace moves in ways that defy logic. The cross does not avoid the guilty. It confronts them, embraces them, and transforms them. The centurion's transformation revealed a truth deeper than the earthquake. No heart is beyond the reach of God, not even the heart of the executioner. His confession did more than express belief. It declared surrender. In that moment, the centurion became a sign as powerful as the darkness and the quake. He became proof that the message of the cross is not reserved for the religious, the learned, or the morally polished. It reaches the broken, the violent, the scarred, the ones who believe they have gone too far for mercy to find them. The man who supervised death found life at the foot of the cross, and while the centurion stood in awe, processing the impossible truth unfolding before his eyes, another group of unlikely figures elsewhere in the city was about to step forward, driven by courage that had slept in silence until the moment it was finally needed. As the sun dipped toward the horizon and the brutal weight of the day settled over Jerusalem, two figures stepped from the shadows, men few expected to show themselves at all. Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council and a wealthy man of honorable character, walked with a resolve he had never displayed in public regarding Jesus. Beside him was Nicodemus, the Pharisee who had once come to Jesus under the cover of night, whispering questions about being born again. Until this moment, both had remained silent, watching events unfold from a careful distance, torn between their positions in the council and the truth stirring in their hearts. But the darkness, the earthquake, and the unmistakable weight of what they had witnessed drove them beyond fear. Their hidden loyalty could no longer remain hidden. With courage awakened by sorrow, Joseph went straight to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus, a request so bold it could cost him his influence, his seat, perhaps even his safety. Pilate, weary from the chaos and strangely unsettled by the supernatural signs that had marked Jesus' death, granted Joseph's request. Joseph and Nicodemus then approached the cross with reverence, their hands trembling as they lowered the lifeless body of the one they had secretly believed in. Nicodemus brought about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes, an extravagant amount used only for the burial of kings. They wrapped Jesus' body carefully, layer by layer, cleansing the blood-matted wounds, honoring the one they had not defended in life but were determined to honor in death. Every gesture testified to a devotion that had long been silent, but now spoke louder than any public declaration. They carried him to a garden near the place of crucifixion, to Joseph's own new tomb carved into solid rock, a burial reserved for someone of high status. There, in the dimming light, These two unlikely disciples laid the body of the Son of God in a resting place no other person had ever occupied. But while Joseph and Nicodemus acted in love, the religious leaders acted in fear. The same authorities who had pushed relentlessly for Jesus' execution could not silence the memory of his words. They recalled vividly that Jesus had claimed he would rise on the third day. To them, this possibility was not a hope, but a threat. The idea of his disciples stealing the body and declaring resurrection terrified them more than anything that had happened so far. So, on the day after the crucifixion, they went to Pilate once more, their voices cloaked in urgency. They described Jesus as a deceiver and demanded protection against what they believed would be the greatest deception of all. Pilate, uninterested in further conflict but eager to prevent unrest, agreed. He assigned Roman guards to secure the tomb and authorized the placement of the official imperial seal, a mark no one dared to break under penalty of death. The stone was rolled firmly into place, the seal pressed into wax, and the elite guards stationed before the entrance, their armor glinting beneath the fading light. Every precaution they took reflected the depth of their fear. They believed they were preventing a lie, yet they were unknowingly preparing the stage for a truth they could not stop. The tomb was sealed by the highest earthly power Rome possessed. The guards were trained, disciplined, and fully equipped. The stone was heavy enough to require several men to move it. From every human perspective, Jesus was locked within an impenetrable fortress of death. But what the leaders failed to understand was that no stone, no seal, and no human authority could restrain the author of life. Their attempt to contain him would only magnify the miracle to come. And as the guards took their positions, unaware of the cosmic significance of the task assigned to them, the garden settled into a deep stillness. Yet beneath that stillness, something was gathering strength, something no empire, no seal, and no fearful heart could ever hope to contain. The city had barely begun to recover from the darkness, the earthquake, and the cascading signs of a world groaning beneath a divine moment, when dawn approached on the third day. The garden where Joseph had laid Jesus was quiet, wrapped in that stillness that only early morning brings. But something unseen was stirring within the earth, a tremor not of destruction, but of power, preparing to break through stone and silence. The women who loved Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, walked along the path carrying spices, their hearts heavy with grief and devotion. They whispered to one another about the stone, wondering who might help them move it, unaware that no human hands would be needed. As they neared the tomb, the ground shook again, not with the violent fear of the crucifixion, but with the arrival of an angel whose appearance was like lightning and whose presence caused trained Roman guards to collapse as though dead. The great stone that had sealed the entrance was no longer in place. It had not been cracked or pushed from within by human strength, but rolled aside by the authority of heaven. The seal of Rome lay broken, its power meaningless before the one who commands the universe. The angel sat upon the stone, as though marking the end of death's claim, and his voice carried a message that would reverberate through every generation to come. He is not here. He has risen. The women stepped inside, hearts pounding, and saw the burial cloths lying where his body had rested. The covering for his head was folded neatly, placed apart from the others. Nothing in that scene spoke of panic or theft. Everything spoke of order, intention, triumph. Jesus had risen, not as a spirit, not as a distant echo of life, but in glorified physical reality. The grave that had swallowed so many now stood empty before them, defeated by the one who entered its depths only to break it from the inside out. In the hours and days that followed, the world began to change. Jesus appeared to his followers again and again, restoring hope where fear had taken root. He walked with two disciples on the road to Emmaus, opening the scriptures as though unveiling a tapestry woven since creation. He stood among the 11 in a locked room, offering peace to men who believed their story had ended in failure. He invited Thomas to touch the wounds in his hands and side, answering doubt with gentleness rather than rebuke. He cooked breakfast for weary fishermen by the Sea of Galilee. And at one moment, witnessed by more than 500 believers, he stood alive, whole, radiant with the unshakable truth that death holds no authority over him. Each encounter peeled away the shadows that had settled over his followers, replacing despair with a fire that would eventually carry his message to the ends of the earth. The resurrection was not a rumor. It was not an illusion. It was a reality that reshaped every heart it touched. Yet even with all these signs, not everyone believed. Some covered the truth with silver, bribing the guards to remain silent. Some chose the comfort of denial rather than the risk of surrender. The same evidence that opened the centurion's heart hardened others, and so the question that hung over Jerusalem in those days hangs over every listening heart now. What will you do with this truth? The empty tomb is not merely an event of history, it is an invitation. It calls you to step out of the shadows, to walk through the torn veil, to stand on solid ground, even when the world shakes. If this message has reached something deep within you, do not let it fade. Share it, speak it, live it. And if you feel moved to stand with this community of faith, consider following our channel and declaring in the comments the same truth that changed history forever. Light overcomes.